Today, friends, is August 10th. It's Tuesday, 2021. We're looking at 1 Kings 19. It's a fantastic book. It concerns Elijah. And this is in the period of the divided monarchy. And Elijah is a prophet from Tishbe in Gilead. He's been called to try to bring the northern kingdom back in alignment with the faith of their ancestors, the worship of the true God, the creator of heaven and earth. And when we left the prophet yesterday, he had announced a drought that would last for 3 years and gone into hiding in 2 different locations. And then suddenly God calls him to meet with the king. And so he goes one-on-one with Ahab. He sends a message through one of Ahab's advisors, Obadiah, who actually happened to be a follower of Yahweh. Even though he was working in the court, he managed to hide some of the prophets of Yahweh that otherwise would have been killed by the king. And Elijah sends through Obadiah a message to the king, I want to meet one-on-one with you. And the king agrees, and the king just spews forth venom toward Elijah. He says, you are the troubler. It's a word for making the waters murky. Have you ever had a pool of water? And this happens to me when I'm playing golf, and I hit it, or I'm looking for a golf ball in a pool of water, and I maybe can see the ball, and I reach out with my retriever and I disturb the bottom of the pool, and it becomes all muddy and messy, and I lose sight of what I'm doing. And the king of Israel, Ahab, says, you are the troubler of the nation's soul. You are the one who is making everything murky and difficult. And Elijah, far from backing down, turns it around on him, and he says, no, you are the troubler. You're the one who is the focus of God's anger and judgment and wrath because of your disloyalty to him and your abandoning of the true faith. And it's you and your wife that are causing the problems. It takes a lot of chutzpah to do that. And then his courage grows even greater, and Elijah says, let's have a showdown. Let's settle this once and for all. Let's bring an end to the drought. Let's demonstrate whether your God, Baal, really has power or whether it's my God, Yahweh. And so they assemble on Mount Carmel according to the prophet's instructions, and all of Israel gathers around to see this kind of pyrotechnic display where they set up 2 altars, and the 450 prophets from Baal began to ask their god Baal to light their sacrifices on fire. They can't get a spark. They can't even get a matchstick going. Nothing happens. There is no response. And immediately Elijah begins to mock them and says, your God is asleep, maybe your God has died, but nothing is happening on your end. And then he pours water over his own sacrifices to make them almost impossible to light. And he prays and calls down to Yahweh, and there is a lightning bolt that comes from the sky, a clear blue sky, bang, hits right on the sacrifices, incinerates them in an instant, and they're gone. And the people there, all of Israel, are amazed, and they realize that they've been worshiping false gods when they've been worshiping Baal. And Elijah uses that public moment and turns the crowd against the prophets from Baal, 450 of them, and executes them. And then he comes back and he says to the king, now, I'm going to advise you, there's a monsoon coming. We've had 3 years of drought. And I know you can't see a cloud on the horizon, but there's a huge rain that's coming. So get started, get your chariot going, because otherwise there's going to be so much rain it's going to be stuck in the mud. And off the king goes, probably in awe at what he'd just seen in terms of the sacrifices. Off he goes in his chariot. And there's a little cloud that appears on the horizon to the west, to the east, and it grows and grows, and it becomes a gigantic storm that makes up for the years of drought and begins to flood the land with the possibility of rebirth and growth. Elijah, not to be outdone, girds up his loins and starts to sprint, and he runs 15 miles, over 15 miles back to the place where the king is going, to Jezreel, because his assumption is the king will now recognize the error of his ways. He'll have a feast. They will recovenant with Yahweh as the true God, and life will begin again in terms of worship, just like it's going to begin again in terms of agriculture. But it doesn't happen. It does not happen. The king tells his wife what's happened, And Jezebel becomes angry, and as the defender of the cult of Baal, she sends a message to Ahab that says this: "So may the gods do to me, and more, if I don't make your life like the life of the prophets you killed by this time tomorrow." She's giving him a royal edict. You've got 24 hours to live. You better scram, because I'm coming for you, and my intent is to wipe you off the face of the earth. Now, the next sentence is a shocker for me. The first time I read it, this was a prophet who had lived on the run, who'd been sustained by God, who'd seen God bring a young boy back from the dead. He had been fed miraculously by ravens in the wilderness. He confronted the king. He had seen God work the miracle of the weather, both the drought and the rain. He called down fire from heaven. I mean, he had really seen the power of God in amazing ways. And yet, this message from the queen, then he was afraid. He got up and he fled for his life. And he went to Beersheba. The northern kingdom, the northern part of Israel was, of course, in the north. You had to come down through the whole territory of Judah, down through Jerusalem, down past Jerusalem. The last town in the southern kingdom was Beersheba. And he goes all the way to Beersheba, and he left his servant there, and then he went on. So he went into the wilderness. He left the promised land. He left the land of promise, and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he asked the Lord if he could die. He wanted permission to die. "It is enough now, Lord, take away my life. I am no better than my ancestors." Wow. This man who'd worked miracles and seen miracles is now completely undone. One of the great lessons of this chapter is that every single person is vulnerable. I'm vulnerable. You're vulnerable. And that's not a sign of personal weakness. That's a feature of us being creatures. It's a feature of the delicate relationship between body and heart and mind and soul, and the fact that we can be impacted emotionally by reverses in life. In a way, the more we invest and the stronger we are, the more determined we are, the more we want to do great things in the world, even great things for God, like Elijah wanted, the more bitter disappointment we're going to feel if things don't work out, if we reach what we feel is a dead end in the road. And Elijah did. And in a way, the victory at Mount Carmel, although it was the greatest moment of his career, was the worst moment, because he discovered soon afterward that even that spectacular victory wasn't enough to move the royal couple. They had built their national security and their public policy on this relationship with other nations that were worshiping Baal, and with the Phoenicians. And so they weren't going to change policy, even if it was clearly demonstrated that their God was powerless. So it's a bit of a myth we have in America that we're all meant to be autonomous individuals. Autonomy is one of our central values in Western culture. Autonomy means that we're going to act independently of one another. We're going to be sort of like individual units that don't depend much on each other. And through free agency and sheer determination and personal power, we're going to control our destinies. And that's just not in accord with reality, because we are always and everywhere creatures that are dependent upon God for life and strength. And if we work with this other idea, this myth, we're going to be shocked at those moments where we run into emotional or mental trouble and we hit a bit of a dead end. I wonder if in the story of Elijah you can find some of the classic signs of depression. Well, I want to run through a few of them because I want you to be able to recognize these things in yourself if you're ever at that point, or in others around you that might need your friendship and compassion. One sign is exhaustion, mental, physical exhaustion, someone that just is sleeping all the time because they kind of can't face life. And because they're emotionally tired, they're also physically tired. He was napping several times in the daytime. In chapter 19 we see. Another sign is this desire for life to stop, not go on. Just the challenges being too great. I wish I just didn't have to take another step. That's a suicidal pattern of thinking that is there. The movement away from responsibilities toward isolation. This is what he does when he leaves the northern kingdom, Goes all the way through the southern kingdom. Could have stayed in any of those places, some of which there was some considerable devotion to Yahweh, and instead goes down out of the promised land, in effect saying no to further work as a prophet, and goes out alone into the wilderness. It's, as I look at my own life, there's several times where I have struggled emotionally, and it's a hard thing. These feelings of isolation, where you don't have your normal energy, when you can't see a way forward. Often your sleeping patterns are interrupted, your eating patterns. Elijah later we see also is having trouble eating. These are all kind of signs of struggle on his part, and your view can become distorted by the emotions that you're feeling. So as we'll learn later in the passage, his view of what's going on in the world is considerably been constricted. Let's take a moment and pray. Lord, help us to remember that we're creatures, to know our own vulnerability, to be aware that we need to be people who have the kind of practices and the kind of people in our life that sustain us when we reach dead ends. And Lord, in a way, the more strong we are as leaders and as people with great hopes and dreams for the kingdom and for our lives, the more subject we are to some of the disappointments like the great prophet Elijah had after the incident at Mount Carmel. So help us to be aware of these dynamics, to look for these issues in others, and to be ready to give them support. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.